He was a young man serving in the Royal Navy, thousands of miles away on the other side of the ocean, when the letter arrived. For Charles, the son of Queen Elizabeth II, the sea had always represented a kind of freedom, a place where he could escape the gilded cage of his royal existence and find a sense of purpose away from the stifling formality of the British court. But on this particular day in 1973, the vast Atlantic Ocean felt less like an escape and more like a prison, a cruel barrier separating him from the one thing he suddenly realized he could not bear to lose. The letter was from a friend back home, and its contents were brief, factual, and utterly devastating. It contained news that would fundamentally alter the course of his life and, in time, the future of the British monarchy itself. Camilla Shand, the vibrant, a confident and earthy woman with whom he had shared a whirlwind and deeply passionate romance just a year earlier, was engaged to be married. Her fiancé was Andrew Parker Bowles, an officer in the British Army and a former flame with whom she had a long and complicated history. As the ship cut through the gray, rolling waves, Charles retreated to his quarters, the letter trembling in his hands. He read the words again and again, each time hoping that the ink would somehow rearrange itself, that it would be a mistake, a cruel joke. But it was true. The woman he had laughed with, talked with for hours on end, and felt a connection with that he had never experienced before, was promised to another man. The story of Charles and Camilla did not begin with scandal, but with a spark of genuine, undeniable chemistry. And they had been introduced at a polo match in Windsor Great Park in the early 1970s by a mutual friend. Camilla, the daughter of Major Bruce Shand, a dashing war hero, and the Honorable Rosalind Cubitt, was from the same aristocratic milieu as the prince. She possessed an easy confidence that was rare in the people Charles usually met. She did not curtsy and simper. She teased him. She was down to earth, unfazed by his title, and had a wonderfully throaty, irreverent sense of humor. For Charles, who had grown up with a distant father and an emotionally unavailable mother, who had been bullied at the Spartan Gordonstown school and had spent his life surrounded by courtiers who treated him with kid gloves, Camilla was a revelation. She was real. She was interested in him, not the Prince of Wales. They shared a love of the countryside and of hunting, of long walks and silly jokes. It was a romance that felt destined, a meeting of two souls that seemed to fit perfectly. But destiny, it seemed, had other plans for the immediate future. Charles, as a young man in his early 20s, was also bound by duty. The Royal Navy required his service, and in early 1973, he was deployed. It was a decision he would come to regret for the rest of his life. He had assumed that what they had was strong enough to withstand a little time and distance. He had been naive. The engagement of Camilla to Andrew Parker Bowles was announced in the pages of the Times, the newspaper of record for the British establishment. It was a fait accompli. Sources close to the royal family later described Charles's reaction as one of absolute devastation. A royal biographer, Penny Junor, noted that he was absolutely devastated, heartbroken. It was, as many would later observe, the first time he had truly fallen in love, and he was learning the cruelest lesson of all, that love does not always wait. In a desperate last-ditch attempt to change the course of fate, Charles took urgent action. From his ship, he sent a flurry of letters to Camilla, pleading with her to reconsider. Vanity Fair's royal correspondent, Katie Nicholl, later revealed that he wrote to Camilla and pleaded with her to reconsider. But I think by this point, it was just too late. The wedding plans were too far advanced, the social pressure too immense. For a woman of her time and class, a broken engagement would have been a scandal. And perhaps, on some level, She also doubted that a future with the heir to the throne was truly possible. What kind of life would that be? A life lived in the relentless glare of the public eye, subject to the whims of the crown and the expectations of a nation. So on July 4th, 1973, Camilla Shand became Camilla Parker Bowles in a grand wedding at the Guards Chapel in London. Charles, still at sea, was not present. He could only imagine the scene. Camilla in her white dress, smiling at another man. The man who would be king was left to grieve a future that had been snatched away before it had even truly begun, the sting of the letter a permanent scar on his heart. He had lost her, and the world he was born into had played a part in taking her away. This was not the end of their story, of course. It was merely the first agonizing chapter. And the years that followed the wedding of Camilla and Andrew Parker Bowles were a period of forced acceptance and quiet desperation for the Prince of Wales. He threw himself into his royal duties, traveling the world, opening hospitals, and making speeches. He also continued his relationships with other women, most notably the young and beautiful Lady Diana Spencer. By 1980, the pressure on the 32-year-old prince to marry and produce an heir to the throne had become an incessant drumbeat. His family, the press, and the public were all clamoring for him to find a suitable bride. Diana was young, shy, from an aristocratic family, and seemed, on the surface, to be the perfect candidate. She was untainted by scandal and had a fresh-faced innocence that captivated the nation. Charles, too, was initially charmed, but their courtship was brief, and the shadow of Camilla loomed over it from the very beginning. Biographers have since revealed that Charles was still deeply entangled with Camilla during this time. He sought her advice on his relationships, and some believe he even sought her approval of Diana as a potential bride. It was a dynamic that was fraught with emotional peril. The fairy tale wedding of 1981, watched by a global audience of 750 million people, was, for many, the beginning of the end. The seeds of discord were sown early. Diana, young and deeply sensitive, quickly became aware of the powerful presence of another woman in her husband's life. She found a bracelet Charles had commissioned as a gift for Camilla, inscribed with the letters F and G, standing for their pet names for each other, Fred and Gladys. She found photographs, and the knowledge festered, creating a chasm of mistrust and insecurity that would only widen with time. For Charles, the marriage to Diana was a disaster from the start. He was a man of complex thoughts and interests, a lover of philosophy, history, and the arts. Diana, though radiant and empathetic, was not intellectually curious in the same way. Their age difference of 13 years created a gulf in experience and maturity. He felt suffocated by her emotional neediness. She felt betrayed by his emotional unavailability. He retreated to his books and his gardens. She threw herself into the adulation of the public. Meanwhile, Camilla remained a constant, if unseen, presence. She and Charles moved in the same social circles. Andrew Parker Bowles was a friend and equerry to the Queen. By 1986, according to Charles's own authorized biography, the affair that would come to define them had been reignited. It was not a sudden, passionate eruption, but a gradual rekindling of an old flame that had never truly been extinguished. They were soulmates who had made a terrible mistake in not fighting harder for each other, and they were now both trapped in loveless marriages. Their meetings were clandestine, filled with the thrill and desperation of forbidden love. They relied on a network of loyal friends who would lend them their homes for trysts. There were secret phone calls, coded messages, and a constant gnawing fear of discovery. A former pilot for the royal family later revealed the lengths they went to, disclosing that Camilla would take private jets to meet Charles during his official overseas tours, always managing to stay one step ahead of the press. They saw each other abroad, but the press never caught them, he recalled, painting a picture of a couple whose love was strong enough to fuel an elaborate and risky double life. To the outside world, Charles and Diana played their parts. They smiled for the cameras on official tours, projecting an image of unity. But the strain was becoming unbearable. Diana, feeling increasingly isolated and desperate, began to act out. Her struggles with bulimia and postpartum depression were hidden from the public. But they were a very real part of the tumultuous atmosphere inside their marriage. Charles, for his part, felt trapped between his duty to the crown and his love for Camilla. He was not a cruel man, but he was an absent one, emotionally and physically. His heart, in truth, was no longer in his marriage. It had never really been there at all. It belonged, and perhaps always had, to the woman he had lost nearly 15 years earlier. The fairy tale had become a Gothic tragedy, and the world was only just beginning to sense the ghosts that haunted it. The fragile facade of the royal marriage finally shattered in 1992, a year the Queen herself would memorably describe as her annus horribilis. The catalyst was the publication of Andrew Morton's explosive book, Diana, Her True Story, which laid bare the princess's misery, her eating disorders, and her suspicion that her husband was having an affair with Camilla Parker Bowles. The genie was out of the bottle. Later that same year, the release of a secretly recorded, intimate telephone conversation between Charles and Camilla from 1989 pushed the scandal into a new and deeply embarrassing stratosphere. Dubbed Camilla-gate, or the more vulgar Tampon-gate, by the press, the transcript of the 6-minute call was published in January 1993. The world was treated to the extraordinary spectacle of the heir to the throne telling his lover that he wished to be reincarnated as a tampon so he could live inside her. The conversation was intimate, silly, and deeply personal, never meant for public consumption. But it was now splashed across the front pages of every newspaper on the planet. For Charles, it was a moment of profound humiliation. The mockery was global and relentless. Late-night comedians had a field day. Cartoons depicted him talking dirty to his plants. The Italian press gleefully dubbed him Prince Tampacino. More damagingly, the tape stripped away any remaining mystique surrounding his relationship with Camilla. What had been speculation was now confirmed in the most graphic and embarrassing way imaginable. The affair was no longer a rumor, it was a fact, spoken in his own voice. Princess Diana, upon hearing the headlines, reportedly declared with a sense of grim satisfaction, "Game, set, and match." For years, she had been portrayed as the unstable one, the difficult wife. The tape seemed to confirm her version of events, that her husband was hopelessly and passionately in love with another woman. It was a devastating public validation of her private pain. The fallout was catastrophic for all involved. Public opinion, which had already been turning against Charles, now hardened. A poll showed that a significant percentage of the public felt he had damaged the monarchy and believed he should step aside in favor of his son, the 10-year-old Prince William. For Charles, who had been raised his entire life to be king, this was a deeply wounding blow. For Camilla, the consequences were even more immediate and brutal. She became the most reviled woman in Britain. The press camped outside her home, Middlewick House in Wiltshire. She was hounded whenever she ventured out. She was the other woman, the marriage wrecker, the Rottweiler, the target of a level of vitriol that was as ferocious as it was unprecedented. For an intensely private person who had never sought public attention, it was a living nightmare. The scrutiny became so unbearable that she effectively became a prisoner in her own home. Our royal author Tina Brown described how Camilla retreated to Middlewick House for a year, feeling more isolated than she had ever felt in her life. She and Charles stopped communicating altogether, too terrified that their phones were being tapped. Her children, Tom and Laura, had to navigate the cruel taunts of their schoolmates. Camilla later reflected on this period, telling an interviewer with characteristic understatement, "I couldn't really go anywhere, but the children came and went as normal. They just got on with it. And so did great friends. I would pass the time by reading a lot. And after a while, life sort of went on." It was a dark, quiet, and lonely time. The passionate love affair that had been conducted in the shadows for so long was now being conducted in a crushing, suffocating silence. And the world had judged them, found them guilty, and handed down a sentence of public scorn. But in the depths of this despair, an unexpected event occurred that would, over time, slowly and painfully begin to reshape the narrative. On August 31st, 1997, Princess Diana was killed in a car crash in Paris. The world wept for the people's princess, and in an instant, the landscape of the royal drama shifted entirely. For Charles, the tragedy brought a stark and sobering clarity. He had lost the mother of his children in the most shocking way imaginable. The intense public grief for Diana seemed to solidify her status as a saint, and by extension to damn Charles and Camilla as the villains of the piece forever. But in the immediate aftermath, Charles's focus was not on his own reputation, but on his two young sons, William and Harry, who had just lost their mother. He had to put them first. The road ahead seemed impossibly long. But for Charles and Camilla, their story was far from over. The years of exile were about to give way to a slow, methodical, and breathtakingly unlikely campaign for redemption. The death of Princess Diana froze the public perception of Charles and Camilla in a block of ice. They were the villains, the architects of her misery, and for a time, any hope of rehabilitation seemed not just impossible, but unthinkable. The public's adoration of Diana was absolute, and her tragic end only cemented her iconic status. For Camilla, in particular, the years following the crash were a kind of purgatory. She remained hidden, a spectral figure, the subject of continued intense hostility. But Charles, driven by a love that had survived decades of separation, scandal, and now tragedy, was quietly determined. He understood that if he and Camilla were ever to have a life together, it would require a masterclass in public relations. It would require patience, humility, and, most of all, the slow, gradual acceptance of his sons, the two people who had lost the most. He began what royal watchers would later call Operation PB, or Campaign Camilla. It was a strategy of incremental, carefully managed exposure. The first seismic crack in the ice came in January 1999. Charles and Camilla were photographed together for the first time as a couple. The carefully orchestrated photo opportunity took place outside the Ritz Hotel in London as they left a 50th birthday party for Camilla's sister. The world's press was there, and a heaving scrum of photographers. Camilla, looking nervous but elegant, walked by Charles's side. It was a moment of profound significance. The affair was no longer a secret. It was a relationship, out in the open. The message was clear. They were a couple, and they were not going away. The next crucial step was winning over the princes. Prince William, in particular, had endured unimaginable pain, and his father knew that his blessing was essential. It was a long and delicate process. Initially, both William and Harry had complex feelings about their father marrying Camilla, with Harry later writing that he worried she might be dangerous. But over time, they witnessed the positive effect she had on their father. She made him happy in a way they had never seen before. She was not trying to replace their mother, and she was simply a steady, supportive, and kind presence. Eventually, the prince's acceptance and even affection for their stepmother became a powerful tool in changing the public narrative. If the boys were okay with it, the reasoning went, then perhaps the rest of the country could be too. Camilla herself began a slow, deliberate transformation from public enemy number one to a dedicated public servant. She took on a growing portfolio of charitable work, championing causes that were far from glamorous. She became a passionate advocate for victims of rape, sexual abuse, and domestic violence, issues that many royals had previously shied away from. She also threw her energy into promoting literacy, founding her own online book club and a charitable organization to foster a love of reading. And this work revealed a different side of Camilla, a woman of substance, empathy, and quiet determination. She was no longer just the other woman. She was a working royal carving out her own niche. In February 2002, the death of the Queen Mother, a staunch traditionalist who had reportedly disapproved of Camilla, removed a significant obstacle. Slowly, the fog began to lift. In 2005, 35 years after they first met, Charles and Camilla were married in a civil ceremony at Windsor's Guildhall, followed by a service of prayer and dedication at St. George's Chapel. The late Queen, Elizabeth II, attended the service and hosted a reception for them, a powerful public benediction that signaled the family's full acceptance. Camilla was given the title Duchess of Cornwall, and a deliberate choice to avoid the Diana-associated title of Princess of Wales. The final, most astonishing chapter of this long and winding story was yet to be written. For years, it was widely assumed that Camilla would never be queen. The plan, it was said, was for her to be known as the princess consort when Charles became king. But as the years passed and her public standing grew, the narrative shifted. Then, in February 2022, in a move that surprised many, the Queen herself issued a historic statement on the 70th anniversary of her accession. She expressed her sincere wish that, when the time came, Camilla would be known as Queen Consort. It was the ultimate seal of approval, a final laying to rest of the ghosts of the past. When the Queen died in September 2022, Charles became king, and Camilla stood by his side. On May 6th, 2023, in a historic coronation ceremony at Westminster Abbey, she was crowned Queen Camilla, the woman the world had once reviled, now sharing the throne. The journey from the devastating letter of 1973 to the glittering crown of 2023 was a testament to a love that refused to die. For Charles, uncovering and navigating the hidden past and public condemnation had been a long, painful road. But in the end, the truth that had once left him utterly devastated had, against all odds, led him to a life with the woman he had never stopped loving.